This is Russia's real wage growth since 2011. Real wages mean the data is already adjusted for inflation, which is consistently quite high in Russia. If we take 2011 as 100%, then by 2024, the average Russian could afford 60% more goods and services than 13 years earlier. Few in Russia would really agree with this claim. But that's what Rosstat, the Russian state's main statistical agency, has published. Here's another chart from the same agency. And here's a conundrum. Wages grew by 60% over 13 years, and labor productivity at the same time only by 20%. Russian incomes are rising 3 times faster than workers' efficiency. This can't go on for much longer. Either productivity catches up to wages, or wages will have to stop and wait. The trend is already here. Over the first 9 months of 2025, wages grew by just 4.5%. Sounds good. If only in 2024 it wasn't twice as much, 9% and 7.4% in 2023 over the same period. You don't need to be an economist to understand this simple relationship. Wage growth follows labor productivity growth, not the other way around. The more you produce, the more income the company has to pay you a higher salary. In a perfect world, at least. I guess Russia is better than perfect. Salaries are growing and people don't have to break their backs juggling multiple jobs. How is that a bad thing? Well, I don't see a problem here either. Unlike the head of the Russian central bank, she says wages growing faster than productivity only pushes up overall prices. And another head of the bank, largest in Central and Eastern Europe, calls Russia's wage growth unprecedented. He also says this wage growth must come to a halt. Nothing surprising here. They always want to pay workers less. The thing is, the international community agrees with the Russian experts. Let's compare labor productivity in Russia and the rest of the world. In Russia, it averages $36.6 per hour, like normal human body temperature. Fine for a thermometer reading, but quite low in comparison to other countries. Russia sits somewhere around here. For reference, average productivity in the US is $83.5 per hour, Australia 76.8, France a happy 77.7, Spain is at 64, Canada 62, and even Turkey is at 56.5. That's 1.5 times higher than Russia. Even the former satellites, like neighboring Kazakhstan, slightly outperform them. On the other hand, the world's main factories, China and India, are doing even worse. But their production is still based on scale, not pure efficiency. If every worker in those countries had productivity comparable to an average American, the rest of the world combined would quickly become the economic slave of those 2.5 billion large nations. Do I get this right? The Chinese worker is asleep at his workplace, while his American colleague is cranking out 3 shifts worth of work. Doubt that. As always, it's the numbers game. Despite the name, labor productivity has very little to do with how hard or how long you work. But this is exactly the thing that prevents a country from reaching American or European living standards. One metric will help us understand how the Russian economy works from the inside. Let's dispel all doubt in today's episode. We'll show what the real barrier is to economic growth, how you can be both the smartest and the poorest, and why the laziest people actually earn the most. Drop what you are doing because it's not your efforts that make you money. And before we start, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We're just beginning our new journey and trying out different topics and formats. Be among the first to help shape the vision of the new researcher. And the best way to start, of course, is some Slavic folklore introduction. Meet Ilya Muromets, the Superman of Russian fairy tales. But unlike Mr. Kent, who decided to start saving the world at the age of 18, Ilya spent 33 years of his life just lying on a brick stove. He really took his time before going on a trip. Then there is Emelia from the fairy tale At the Pike's Behest. He went even further. He didn't even get up from a stove. He spent almost the entire story on it, making it move by magic, breezing through every challenge without taking a single extra step. This guy even got his own monument in Russia. This right here is all the explanation you need on why Russia's productivity is twice as low as that of the West. Or maybe just take a look at how long paid leave lasts in Russia. It's 42 days. In Germany, it's 30 days. In Canada, 25 days, and in China, 23 days. The US always being the only exception where there is no mandated paid annual sick or childcare leave. Workers are entirely at the mercy of their employer. It's standard for a year at a company to grant you 10 days of paid leave, while 5 years of loyal service bumps it up to a whopping 2 weeks. But we digress. If you watched our previous video, you now know that Russia is a champion, not just of vacuuming money out of its citizens' pockets, but also in the sheer number of days its citizens are legally allowed to skip work. There is a grain of truth in every folktale. So you want to live a better life? Just take fewer breaks and work harder. Yeah, right. And I have a different proposal. How about I take this crowbar and shove it up your… What? Take it easy. Okay, in reality, things are not that simple. It's true that on paper Russians do have the highest number of vacation days. But when it comes to the actual numbers of hours worked, they're practically second to none. On the screen, you can see how much the average resident of Russia works per year. In Russia, this figure is just over 2,000 hours, or 40 hours a week. The standard, according to law, amount of most countries, including Russia. Meanwhile, in the US, people work only 1,800 hours a year, or 34.5 hours a week. In France, it's less than 1,500, which translates to a modest 28 hours a week. You could say the average Frenchman shifted to a 4-day workweek from 10 to 5 a long time ago. So who's the lazy one now? And both countries' productivity at the same time is 2 to 3 times higher than in Russia. Does it mean lazy countries turn out to be more productive than hard-working ones? It sounds strange, but there's no paradox here. What is labor productivity? At the factory level, it's simple. Let's say one worker on an average day pumps out 100 high-quality widgets per hour. Then take his irresponsible colleague at the next machine who steps out for a smoke every 15 minutes, runs late returning from lunch, and doesn't pay attention to his work. As a result, he only makes 50 widgets, and the quality seems subpar. The maths here is simple. His productivity will be twice as low. But our productivity will easily double if you share this video with your friends and help us find our audience. Reaching new people with our content is what motivates us every day. Thank you. Let's switch from the factory level to the country-wide view. Thinking of America as the first worker and Russia as the second one is nowhere near as accurate. At the macroeconomic level, labor productivity is simply a country's GDP divided by the total number of hours put in by all its citizens. Now, let's remember a basic arithmetic. Dividing by hours means if people work less hours, the denominator would also be smaller. This makes the resulting labor productivity figure bigger. So you have to figure out how to output higher GDP while reducing the workweek. Simply put, work less, make more. Work smarter, not harder.
The Soviet Union? I thought you guys broke up.
Yes, that's what we wanted you to think.
Okay, the Russians being lazy loafers is an easy myth to debunk. But there's another trope deeply rooted in the country's mentality. The myth of the world's best Soviet education system. Except this one might not be a myth after all. There are no objective metrics that can fairly evaluate totally different educational systems, but comparatively Russia really does remain a highly educated country. Take a look at this chart. It shows the number of college graduates in correlation with GDP per capita based on purchasing power parity. In other words, it showcases if there's a link between how educated people are and their quality of life. Down in the bottom left corner, we see African nations that most people expect to find at the end of the list anyway: Niger, Chad, Rwanda, and others. Moving up, we notice poor but developing South Asian countries: Bangladesh, Vietnam, Myanmar. China's massive population, by the way, skewed its stats again. Despite a colossal number of bachelor's degree holders, on a national scale they still make up less than 5% of the population. In the top right corner of the chart are the usual suspects of any doing well list: Norway, Belgium, the US, Singapore, etc. Wait a second, where's Russia? Not easy to spot, eh? Because they're all the way right here. As always, Russia is a paradox. An absolutely staggeringly high share of people with a higher education, with little influence on the quality of life. Going strictly by these stats, with that many bachelor's degrees, Russia should be leaving the US, Singapore, and the Netherlands behind in the intellectual dust. If Russians are so smart, why are they so poor? Let's dig a little bit deeper. Literally. How does knowledge increase economic output? A manual laborer will dig a ditch with a shovel. Meanwhile, a qualified engineer would design an excavator. Once the machine is built, our imagined engineer country's productivity skyrockets. On our chart, the nation jumps from the bottom left spot straight to the top right, while the places still relying on shovels get left behind as third world economies. In this analogy, Russia trained an army of engineers, but for some reason they're still swinging shovels instead of building excavators. That missing link, trading shovels for machinery, is what we call innovation. Let's look at the Global Innovation Index, published annually by WIPO, a UN agency, to see how Russia's doing in that regard. They rank countries using dozens of different metrics, everything from electricity grids and logistics to feature films and GitHub commits. Oh, let me guess. According to hard data, hard manual work and no play is going to get you stuck somewhere in between Africa, right? Well, let's see for ourselves. Hold on, let's actually break this down. First of all, South Africa, all in all, is a pretty developed place, easily the most developed on its continent. Second, being placed 60th out of 139 countries makes Russia a solid mid-tier performer, which is exactly where it sits in terms of labor productivity anyway. Plus, digging into specific categories reveals Russia ranking much higher. For human capital, they sit at 28th, wedged right between Greece and Luxembourg. For higher education, they hit 21st and 25th for scientific citations. In fact, top Russian universities rival Norway and Austria, comfortably cracking the global top 30. On paper, if the index only looked at these metrics, Russia would be a first world country. But somewhere between the university lecture halls and successful innovation, things hit an invisible wall. So many brilliant minds, yet so little to show for it. It really feels like a paradox. I mean, there is literally a paper titled "The Russia's Paradox." Quoting the author, "Nowadays, long-term economic progress depends critically on improving productivity through knowledge, but this is something Russia appears oddly ill-equipped to do." In it, he looked at the US Patent Office data to see which countries register how much know-how. Over a 20-year span, the office granted about 2.5 million patents. So where did the applicants come from? Japan took first place, followed by Germany, South Korea, then a long list of other nations until we finally hit Spain, Norway, Ireland, and Russia. I don't think I need to explain the size difference between Ireland and Russia. Brilliant idea. Who judges how innovative a country is based on whether its citizens register patents in the US? China manufactures half of everything on Earth, and they're nowhere to be seen in that ranking. Fair point. That's why we need to look at international patent filings instead. Conventionally, these are handled by WIPO, the exact same agency whose index we just broke down. This time around, China and the US comfortably take the top spots. But follow the list down past a long line of countries and there is Russia again, trailing behind tiny spots like Austria and Belgium. The author of the Russia's Paradox article points to another key metric: service exports. He calls this the skills trade, and it's the quickest litmus test for converting education into marketable skills. The logic is simple. If a country is packed with educated adults, their expertise should be in demand globally, meaning those skills get bought and sold. We're talking IT, engineering, finance, consulting, transport, or logistics. We put our skills on display on our Patreon page. That's where you can see me share my personal thoughts and behind-the-scenes production details. You can also get access to our private Discord server to ask me your questions directly. I'd love to have you in our community. So, who are the top of skills trade exports? Nothing surprising, the US, the UK, Germany, France, and China, which only got to the spot not too long ago. Or you can guess who's next. We find Russia way down the line, trailing right behind Turkey. That is the crux of the problem. Russia just cannot commercialize its mountain of college degrees. The shovel refuses to turn into an excavator, even though on paper logic dictates it should have happened ages ago. The thing is, for ideas and research to transform into an actual product, you need another magic word: investments. Let's jump back to that WIPO index. While Russia crushed it in human capital, it hits a wall here, scraping 81st place for investment. When it comes to the share of venture capital in those investments, it drops all the way into the triple digits. On this front, Russia isn't rubbing shoulders with Norway anymore. It's down there with Iran, Azerbaijan, and their closest ally, Belarus. So Russia has a smart, educated, and, as we established, reasonably hard-working population, but almost nobody wants to fund them or channel that raw talent into actual business. The reason venture capitalists are so unenthusiastic lies in another section of the Innovation Index. If we look at the overall rankings again, you'll notice 3 countries that have a grey square hidden among the blue and green ones: Ukraine, the Russian Federation, and Brazil. The number inside that square is the ranking for another crucial category: institutions. Enough institutes, not enough institutions. Back in the 15th century, investments were just as important. An aging Italian startup founder named Christopher, who'd relocated to Portugal, was hunting for backing for his latest project, opening a new trade route to India. First, he pitched to the King of Portugal, then to the King of England, then to the King of France. Every single investor showed him the door except for Ferdinand of Spain. He told him, "All right, I'll fund your little gamble, but if you find gold, silver, or anything valuable out there, my cut is 90%. You get a bunch of fancy titles, bragging rights, and the remaining 10%. Deal? Great. Sign right here." You probably know what happened next. Columbus sailed west, hit new lands, and Spain, as the primary investor and finder-keeper, claimed all of them. They used the massive influx of colonial resources to build the Great Spanish Empire. It was a wildly risky bet. Imagine sailing blindly into the unknown. You could easily lose your life and sink the investment ship in every sense of that phrase. Must be a coincidence that the word adventure sounds so similar to the word venture. If 15th century monarchs used modern tech slang, the Spanish king's funding would be called a venture capital investment. 5 centuries after Columbus's startup struck gold, venture capital has become standard practice in massive economies like the US or China. But how is the VC scene holding up in Russia? On the screen you can see the total volume of Russian venture deals. Setting aside the 2020 pandemic anomaly, deal volume grew steadily up until 2021, peaking at a solid $2.4 billion. Why did the boom stop? War. The Russian invasion of Ukraine triggered a mass exodus of foreign brands, but it also choked off the foreign capital that was ready to fund Russian businesses. But even before that, the Russian VC scene already had a massive scandal which made global headlines. It had to do with this guy. Here you can see him posing for Forbes, claiming with confidence that Russia punches well above its weight compared to other petro-states. He marketed Russia as a solid ground for long-term investment for Western capital, based on his own experience. That article dropped in 2016. 3 years pass, and his latest picture is him sitting inside a Russian courtroom cage. His name is Michael Calvi. The case is a messy, tangled web that deserves its own video, but the short version goes like this. Calvi's fund owned a 52% stake in Bank Vostochny. At one point, the bank issued a $31 million loan to one of Calvi's other companies, which he later paid back using shares from a different business under his control. Essentially, he was moving money in his backyard. It later turned out those shares were wildly overvalued. They weren't worth $31 million, only $7.5 thousand. $7.5 thousand. Now, disputing asset valuations happens all the time in finance. When the numbers are this far apart, partners normally fight it out in a business court, letting auditors debate the math. A long back-and-forth process. But there, a minority shareholder straight up bypassed all the courts and filed a fraud complaint directly to the FSB, Russia's equivalent of the FBI. And as you might have guessed, the FSB moved at lightning speed. A complaint was fired on February the 7th. By February the 12th, they've already wrapped up their investigation. The next day, February the 13th, a criminal case was opened. And on February the 15th, 2019, the exact day the major Sochi Investment Forum opened, Michael Calvi and his partners were locked behind bars. A standard, drawn-out corporate dispute in an instant turned into a high-profile criminal trial. A bunch of tycoons and their petty rivalries. What difference does it make? That's the problem. Calvi wasn't just some random fat cat. He was one of Russia's pioneer venture capitalists and easily its biggest business angel. The fund he launched back in 1994, named Boardroom, was the absolute heavyweight champion of investing in Russian projects. His cash flooded into almost every sector of the economy: TV networks, internet providers, streaming services, medical centers, innovative banks, marketplaces, grocery retail, and more. Those who became market best were once backed by Boardroom dime. Back in 2000, the fund was one of the first to gamble $3 million on a little-known startup called Ozon, a marketplace platform which became Russia's local Amazon. Another $5 million was put into a fledgling search engine called Yandex. It is now CIS country's local Google alternative and an AI research hub. Now, of course, none of this was charity. The fund gave out millions, getting billions in return. But looking back, you could argue that at the turn of the 21st century, Boardroom did as much to build modern Russia's economic landscape as Columbus did to build the Spanish Empire. To help you fully immerse yourself in this story and understand all of its players and their motives, we put together a dedicated long read on how Russia single-handedly got rid of the man who was ready to invest hundreds of millions of dollars into its economy and spent years convincing the rest of the world of its boundless potential. This piece, along with much more, is already waiting for you on our Patreon. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Let's get back to this picture. Somewhere in that 60%, Russia's own Steve Jobs or Elon Musk are probably cooking up a startup with the potential of another Google, or at least Yandex. Something like that could easily push Russia from the bottom left to the top right of the chart. Too bad they won't have a Michael Calvi to back them. His criminal case ended with a guilty verdict and a 5.5-year suspended sentence. Given the current climate in Russia, you could say he got off easy. Naturally, Calvi packed his bags, left the country, and hasn't invested a single cent into the economy since. But the ripple effect from the case was much worse. Hundreds of other venture funds were following the whole debacle very closely and decided Russia wasn't worth the risk, pulling out tens of billions of dollars just as fast as the FSB opened the case on Calvi. The fallout from Calvi's arrest coincided with the pandemic, so it's impossible to isolate its damage through raw numbers alone. But we have some reports from the insiders. Alexei Kudrin, a prominent Russian economist and one of the architects behind the country's massive financial safety net, the National Wealth Fund, put it bluntly. The arrest of Calvi is, without question, a shock to the economy. Since the beginning of this year, capital outflows have doubled, now exceeding $40 billion. It has significantly raised the investment risk for Russia's economy, and that won't change quickly, even if the businessman is released from custody. Even Kirill Dmitriev, head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund and a key player in state economic circles, admitted that the government's attack on Baring Vostok dealt a devastating blow to the country's entire investment community. In 1993, Nobel laureate Douglas North introduced the modern economic concept of institutions, which he neatly defined as the rules of the game in a society. In this analogy, companies and businesses are simply the players. A lot of time has passed since then, and the way we grade these rules across different countries has evolved dramatically. Remember how WIPO slapped Russia with 131st place in the institutions category? If you look at how that index is actually built, it's pretty obvious how it ended up there. The institutions category is broken down into 3 distinct pillars. If we aggressively simplify things, as if we haven't been doing that this whole video, all 3 blocks measure the exact same thing: the likelihood of political and legal risks crashing your business. It tracks who usually wins when a corporate dispute breaks out, whether the courts buckle under political pressure, and how transparent the local laws actually are. In short, it checks if private property is actually safe from the state, or if your entire business can be suddenly frozen, blocked, or seized overnight. Rings a bell? As you can see, 2 of those metrics put the country in 133rd and 132nd place. Keep in mind, there are only 139 countries on the list. Right, another index. Let me guess, same old song from top to bottom. Look, plenty of countries end up where they are on the list for pretty objective reasons. But even if you assume the index creators are biased, the West has a far more formidable rival to worry about: China. Yet that very same index ranks Chinese institutions 44th overall. For some reason, the UN judges the business climate in formerly communist, highly corrupt China to be significantly better than that of Russia. In early 2024, Russian President Vladimir Putin set a goal to push the stock market's capitalization to 66% of GDP. At the time, GDP stood at $2.1 trillion, while the Russian stock market was valued at just $726 billion. That worked out to be about 34% of GDP, meaning Putin was essentially demanding that the stock market double in size. And now it's 2026. Russia's nominal GDP has grown to nearly $2.7 trillion. What about the stock market? Not only it didn't grow in relative terms, it actually tanked in absolute terms too, down to $625 billion. Forget about doubling it. Now it needs to be more than tripled. Just this year, during an economic briefing, Putin pivoted back to the urgent need to boost labor productivity, the exact thing we've been breaking down today. Even labeled it the #1 priority many times. It's a great goal, and it's exactly what they need. But how do you actually achieve it? Even Russian intelligentsia have gone out on a limb to state the obvious. The quality of a country's institutions is the single most important factor. According to the research, there is a direct correlation between the rule of law and labor productivity. On this chart, as you can see, Russia isn't even in its usual spot near the middle. It's drifting towards the bottom. And yes, even there, China ranks higher. This leaves Russia in a highly precarious position. Massive injections of cash from the state budget, the hidden mechanics of which we covered in our previous episode, have stopped driving productivity. The stock market is bleeding value despite all the pleas. The domestic venture capital market has shriveled to a microscopic $159 million, all while Russian expats abroad managed to raise over $3 billion in that exact same timeframe. How do you repatriate these entrepreneurs along with their capital? If the data is anything to go by, institutions are the only answer. You can't have innovation without investment, and you won't get investment without solid institutions. At their core, institutions are just clear, transparent, and fair rules of the game. Rules where no one risks losing their property or their freedom overnight on a whim. The next 5 years will show whether this economic research holds true, or if there really is a unique way which Russia knows that the rest of the world has somehow missed. You know who you should send this video to. Before we wrap up, I want to give a massive thank you to everyone supporting our independent research on Patreon. It's entirely thanks to you that we can create this content without worrying about any outside restrictions or censorship. Join our community to get access to exclusive perks, including deep dive source analyses and personal updates directly from the team. Plus, supporters in our top tier get a truly unique reward. For every single video, we mail out custom hand-drawn artwork created by a real artist. See you in the next one. And I'm the researcher.